Good morning. Welcome to the Deep 404. Overnight, there has been seems to be a flood of information coming out of Ukraine, particularly around the Donetsk area, but not limited to the Donetsk area, talking about the success and advances of Russian forces fighting through those regions. There are multiple reports of advances in townships where fighting has been underway for some time. Also talk of advances moving through fields and approaching new towns. The New York Times is reporting that without additional US funding, that Ukraine will suffer a collapse at the front shortly. And other Western outlets are starting to report upon this. Julian Repke, who is a reporter for the German Bild newspaper, in Avdiivka, where we have been following and fighting has been very heavy. Fighting has been occurring in and from Avdiivka since 2014. This is the township to the west of Donetsk city, which has been involved in the fighting since the civil war conflict or the separation of the Donetsk People's Republic from Ukraine itself started in 2014. It is a heavily fortified city with a coke plant at the top of it. It's a large industrial base within Avdiivka. Julian Repke has provided geolocated video evidence which is being used now to prove the claims that the Russians have effectively split Avdiivka in half at this stage. The Avdiivka itself is a drawn out sort of long township. It's longer in one axis than it is the other. It's quite thin in one axis and long in the other. And it has now been effectively operationally encircled. There is one supply road coming into Avdiivka from the west. That supply road, while the Russians don't yet appear to have physically reached it and taken control of it, they are within hundreds, if not tens of meters of actually physically being able to access and control that road. So for all intents and purposes now, the one remaining supply road into Avdiivka, which comes in from the west and then splits, supplies the southern forces, Ukrainian forces in the southern part of the town, and splits north to the coke plant where the Ukrainian forces are there. This road is now under effective Russian control. So any attempts to resupply, and there is talk of this happening. There is talk that the newly positioned general, new commander for the Ukrainian Armed Forces, General Syrsky, who has replaced General Zaluzhny just this week, he is reportedly hand in hand with President Zelensky and Zelensky's desire to hold on to Avdiivka. General Syrsky has allegedly committed to holding Avdiivka. And there are reports that now forces from near Chasov-Yar and other areas south of Avdiivka are being pulled from their positions to attempt to restock and support Avdiivka. Last night I was on X and chatting to some of the people in this community, and the feeling is that Syrsky will have to be very quick to deploy forces here, or what he may find is that there is no Avdiivka left to defend. What appears to have happened now is that the Russian forces have split through the middle, so they have isolated into two separate, what is termed as cauldrons, two separate groups of Ukrainian forces now, one in the south to the south of the Quarry Lake, and then another group in the north around the industrial centre, the coke plant centre itself. these have been separated. Their lines of communication have now been cut off. Physical access has now been restricted to a thin strip on the western side of Avdiivka, and in reality, access through that area would be effectively a suicide mission, given the proximity to Russian forces and the fact that the Russians in the eastern side of the town around the Quarry Lake, and they hold all of the high ground there now. So the Russians are now able to look down upon this last connecting strip and the supply road, and have full fire control over that road now. The situation of pulling forces down here to support, coming from southern areas, coming from Chasov-Yar, also reportedly coming from the Kupyansk direction in the north. This idea of Syrsky to defend Avdiivka appears to be having what would seem to be quite a logical and obvious effect, is that these other areas are now starting to suffer too, and reports are coming in about breaches in the Ukrainian defences in these areas. In fact, they're all along the line. I'm going to read from a couple of different sources today, but just to give you a feel, it certainly seems as though in the last 24 hours, the pressure upon Avdiivka, areas in Donetsk in particular, and even areas in Kupyansky, for example, are really starting to feel the pressure of the sustained Russian force on the front line. Novomykolaievka, where, if you remember, a couple of days ago we showed that footage of that township just being levelled with an onslaught, a continuing onslaught of TOS-1 heavy flamethrower, thermobaric barrages, Fab 500s, incendiary shelling. The whole of Novomykolaievka appeared to just be a smoking mess of rubble. Now, Julian Repke is reporting in Bild that the Russians now are occupying up to 15% of the village. The situation is becoming critical for the Ukrainian army, he writes. So this is a pro-Ukrainian person writing for a German newspaper here. Russian forces are advancing on the northern and southern flanks, as well as in the centre of the village. They now control up to 15% of its territory. Ukrainian military expert Konstantin Mashovets believes that the Ukrainian armed forces probably no longer control the eastern outskirts of Novomykolaievka. The fighting, you have to understand, is already going on in the village itself, he writes. Russian armed forces are also trying to break through to Novomykolaievka from the south, advancing to the area of the village of Pobeda. It is obvious that the main point of all these Russian efforts is to oust our troops from the entire territory east of the Ugledar-Marinka road. Chasov-Yar. Now, Chasov-Yar is to the west of Artyomovsk, or Bakhmut, as the Ukrainians call it Bakhmut. The Russians refer to that city as Artyomovsk. Chasov-Yar has again been quite a fortified location, which was instrumental to the Ukrainian defence of Bakhmut. Close by, strongly fortified, able to amass troops there and then send them down from Chasov-Yar into Bakhmut. Now, there are reports that Russian groups have managed to knock out Ukrainian forces and are now maintaining a foothold in the forest in the direction of Chasov-Yar. So from where the Russians have now advanced west of Artyomovsk, or west of Bakhmut, Chasov-Yar is now only 1.7 kilometres away in a straight line. 1.7 kilometres, 1,700 metres. For those of you still using imperial units, like a grown man's steps, you probably take about a metre in a step. So it's 1,700 steps, and they'll be in Chasov-Yar, which means that Chasov-Yar itself now is under artillery fire, obviously, from the Russians, and it's very likely that there will be DRG or insurgency groups starting to make their way towards Chasov-Yar, determine what is happening there. They will be getting very close to being within solid FPV drone range as well. In Kupyansk, the Russian Ministry of Defense is showing video on its Telegram channel, reportedly, of an Su-35 destroying an S-300 SAM system in Kupyansk. In the Liman region, there are reports here from the Telegram channel, from the Ukrainian Telegram channel Deep State. Ukrainian reports of Russian DRG groups infiltrating behind them and their forces. The reports here that it's too early for them to have a conclusive summary of what went wrong, but that this is a major failure for them, that their forces were being surprised as Russians were popping up behind them to attack them and then disappearing and returning back to the Russian side. So in this area around Liman, somehow the Russian forces now able to sneak through behind Ukrainian lines, attack them from the rear, and then successfully exfiltrating themselves back out again. The Russian Ministry of Defense has provided their weekly summary. In their weekly summary, they give the summation of the attacks that they have received from the Ukrainian forces. These reports come from their different sort of battle groups, the Yug and Center, Vostok groups, which are along the line, and they reporting covers all the way from Kupyansk all the way down through Krasny Liman and Donetsk, South Donetsk, Zaporozhye and Kherson region down to the Black Sea. This weekly summary gives us not individual figures for each day, but it gives us the total. So the total reported losses in equipment, number of attacks repelled, that sort of thing. They speak that in this last week there have been 31 group strikes with precision-guided weapons. So these are the Russian long-range missile and drone strikes carried out across Ukraine. Here, the Ministry of Defense is saying that these were carried out against facilities of the Ukrainian military-industrial complex, the production facilities of enterprises engaged in the production and repair of aircraft, reconnaissance and strike unmanned aerial vehicles, uncrewed boats or the sea drones, coastal and operational tactical missile systems, as well as rockets for multiple launch rocket systems. Last night, online, Mikhail Volterson on X was discussing about Odessa and the Black Sea area, and the fact that the Russians the Ukrainians seem to maintain the upper hand in terms of sea drones, and people were commenting on what the Russians might do there. What I was suggesting, that the Russians may not be overly concerned with the Ukrainian sea drone capability right now. Reason being is that they are able to enact these long-range missile and drone strikes on Mykolaiv and Odessa. These have been ongoing for months, and they are targeting drone facilities. But also, perhaps more importantly, in the last few days, we have seen an uptick in the Russian long-range strikes into the Kherson region. So Kherson, which goes down, the Dnieper River goes down and meets the Black Sea there. There has been an uptick in a line along the Dnieper River, spreading both south and north of Kherson city itself. These strikes attacking Ukrainian defences in a number of areas along this line is giving me the impression that these may be the preparation stages in Kherson for the Russian forces to look to move back across the Dnieper River, move to take Kherson, or perhaps even skirt Kherson to the south and proceed towards Mykolaiv with ground troops and then on to Odessa. And so My input into that conversation on X last night was that perhaps the Russians not overly concerned with the sea drone threat right now, because they may in the near future be looking to capture the coast of Mykolaiv and Odessa right through to Moldova and Transnistria, and effectively neutralize any sea drone activity by assuming actual ground control of the coastline. Certainly this uptick of activity looking to start to inflict a line of damage across Kherson and perhaps to move the Ukrainian troops back from the river, may be preparation to allow the Russians to again look to cross the river using barges near the Antonovsky Bridge or barges in other areas, and move towards the obvious targets there being Mykolaiv and Odessa port regions. The Ministry of Defence also reports that in the week, nationalist formations and foreign mercenaries have been eliminated. Now, there was this report of the Zolochev hotel strike in Kharkov, which is the second or third such strikes within the last month. Reportedly, these have been aimed at civilian hotels, because the hotels are housing military personnel. The reports of the Zolochev one was that given that these people were being housed in a hotel, they believed that they were then more likely senior. These weren't just the general on the ground soldiers, but these would be advisors, mercenaries, or officer material. A week or so before this, we had a similar thing, which is with the French mercenaries, which caused quite a stir, where upwards of 60 reportedly French mercenaries were killed in a similar sort of hotel strike. In the Kupyansk area in the last week, the Russian Ministry of Defence reports that they have repelled 36 attacks by various mechanised and National Guard brigades of the Ukrainian Armed Forces around Sinkovka and Terny. Also, there has been fighting and advances led by the Russians around Novoslovoskoy, Kislovka, and Berestovyo in the Lugansk and Kharkov regions. Over the last week, the Ministry of Defence reports that Ukrainian troop losses were up to 725 men killed or wounded in Kupyansk area and 10 field artillery systems. As you move from Kupyansk down the line to the Krasny Liman area, this is areas where it seems that General Syrsky is starting to pull some troops to try to support Avdiivka. In the last week in this area, Russians have repelled 14 Ukrainian attacks, and they themselves have been attacking and fighting in the area of Chervonaya Dibrova, Yampolovka, Torskoy, Grigorovka, and the Serebryansky forestry. Now, fighting has been going on in that forestry area for 4 months. They further report that up to 1,500 Ukrainian servicemen have been killed and wounded this week, and 3 field artillery systems destroyed. That number of 3 is surprisingly low, considering the reports over the last couple of weeks for one area. What has led to that? I don't know. It may be, and I guess we will see if this continues for another week, such a low number, it may be that there is just a supply issue with getting artillery pieces to the Krasny Liman area for the Ukrainians. This is to be expected given the continued Russian missile and drone strikes upon the repair, fabrication and assembly factories within Ukraine where artillery pieces are manufactured or where they are repaired as they start to suffer wear and tear from overuse, from trying to fire too many shells, or they suffer some level of damage. They need to be sent back to be repaired. There is less and less capability for that to occur in Ukraine, which means they're being sent out to Lithuania and Romania and Poland to be repaired. That, of course, increases the amount of time, turnaround time, before they are returned to the front line. So perhaps that's why we're seeing a decrease there. Moving into Donetsk, where, as I say, in the last 24 hours, there does seem to be a surge in reporting, and all of this reporting being about Russian advances being made, and this is supported by Ukrainian channels talking about them suffering under these advances. But in Donetsk, the Ukrainian forces in the last week have initiated 26 attacks near Krasnoye, Kleshevka, Shumy, and Pobeda. Fighting has also been going on, and the Russians seem to have been focusing on Bogdanovka, Kurdiumovka, Belgorovka, Avdiivka, and Georgievka. So a number of areas where attacks are occurring from both sides. Reportedly, in this area, this is, of course, the Donetsk area, so this is where we have, of course, Avdiivka, and the Russian advances there, the Russian advances from Bakhmut to Artemovsk towards Chasov-Yar. Ukrainian losses reported at 2,190 men killed or wounded, 2 tanks and 19 field artillery systems and 1 Grad multiple launch rocket system, all reportedly destroyed in this week. In South Donetsk, in this area here, this is where the Vostok group of forces operate. Fighting has been around Ugledar, Urozhny, Staromayorska, and Priutne. In this area, 5 Ukrainian attacks have been reported, and the number of losses, the Ministry of Defense reports, is 1,160 soldiers. 3 tanks and 14 field artillery guns reportedly destroyed in South Donetsk. In the Zaporozhye region, here fighting around the Rabotne, Novodanilovka, Pyatikhatki. In this area, 210 Ukrainian troops reported lost, 4 field artillery systems and 1 Grad multiple launch rocket system. And then as we move down into Kherson, again, this is where we have had these increased reports of long-range artillery striking areas like Tyaginka, Mikhailovka, Ivanovka, Tokarevka, Zolotaya Balka, Antonovka, and Stanislav. 245 servicemen reportedly killed or wounded, 6 field artillery guns, and 1 HIMARS multiple launch rocket system destroyed. The culmination of this week's fighting, if these Russian Ministry of Defense numbers are ones which you choose to believe, as I've said before, these Russian Ministry of Defense numbers in terms of the men killed and wounded are reportedly gathered through intercepted communications. This is what the Russian Defense Minister Sergei Shoigu has said some time ago. That's how that is calculated. In terms of the artillery and equipment losses, I don't know if they're calculated in the same way or if that is more upon visual confirmation, because we do see visual geolocated confirmation of some of these pieces of equipment that they claim to be destroyed. Regardless, we do have, of course, the Ukrainian former prosecutor general Lutsenko, who has come out a couple of weeks ago, and he himself has stated that Ukraine is losing 1,000 men a day. So that's from a Ukrainian member of the Rada, has said they're losing 1,000 men a day. What we see from the Russian reporting this week is that in the last week they have lost a total of 6,030 men, so lower than the Ukrainian estimate. 6,030 men. Still, this is getting up to a monthly total of somewhere near 27,000. If this were to continue for the month, it's been a little lower in the past weeks, but somewhere around probably between 23 and 24,000 Ukrainian servicemen killed or wounded in the last month would be the estimate. In this week, another 59 pieces of artillery or multiple launch rocket systems destroyed. Now, that's the Ministry of Defense summary. There are other challenges which the Ukrainians are going to start having here. One of them is in the mobilization bill. A Ukrainian Telegram channel that I follow, and so this is a translation, but they are speaking about how one of the elements of the mobilization bill, which has shocked the citizens, is that the media has found that there is now the ability for the military to seize civilian agricultural assets, if this is adopted, then the agricultural machinery of individuals will be registered with the military, and they will then be liable for military service, and they will be added onto that person's personal file as an agricultural asset that they have, which the military now has registered. They will not be able to be sold, mortgaged, or moved between regions. What was accompanying this was a picture of a Ukrainian vehicle towing along behind it something that looked like some sort of agricultural tractor or plow. It was from a drone. It wasn't quite easy to tell, but that was just being towed to carry men around. So you can imagine this would happen when you have fighting going on and you need vehicles to transport men around. Agricultural vehicles will start to be used, and this seems to be coming for the Ukrainians. This, of course, is bad because this impacts Ukraine's agriculture industry and its ability to produce food. Now, I reported on some comments from another Ukrainian channel last week. They are suggesting that in 2025, the Ukrainian agriculture industry will collapse in its totality. Whether that will happen then or not, we don't know. It's a long time till there. But things like this, tractors, trailers, the equipment that farmers need to use on a daily basis, equipment that is required in time-sensitive activities too. You can't just take away harvesters and pieces of equipment and tractors and balers and whatever you might need to carry men around for a couple of weeks at the wrong time of the year, because if you do, that will just destroy the ability to grow and to crop properly. Another challenge, Starlink. So Elon Musk has provided Starlink capability to the Ukrainians from early on in this conflict. What is being reported now with some video evidence which seems to support this, both video evidence of Starlink systems being unpackaged and of them being used in the field, but now by the Russians. There are Ukrainian reports on this as well, where they are speaking about this and the challenges that they are now having in terms of the Russians being able to now use Starlink as an extra communications means at the front line, and the fact that it appears the Russians have now developed electronic warfare countermeasures to Starlink. So the Ukrainians are struggling to be able to use their own Starlink capability. It seems the Ukrainians have been quite heavily dependent on Starlink as a communications tool. So if they are losing the ability to operate that at the front line, that of course makes it very difficult for them to operate as a cohesive force at the front line. So a recent change in the Guard with General Syrsky replacing General Zaluzhny. I think that we will probably see in the Ukrainian and Western media General Zaluzhny used as a scapegoat for the crumbling of the Ukrainian defences that we are seeing now. Reports that General Syrsky is looking to hold on to Avdiivka, has apparently promised to Zelensky that he will do this, much like he had promised he would hold on to Bakhmut, and Bakhmut became this terrible waste of Ukrainian life. Avdiivka, if he does continue to fight in this area to try to retain Avdiivka, again, there will be heavy losses to the Ukrainians, and he must tactically be careful here. He will look to reinforce to the north and south of Avdiivka, putting pressure on the tips of the pincers. This is Avdiivka here, and we have the Russian pincer tip coming up here and another one coming up here. He will be looking to attack on the back of this tip and the back of this tip to take the focus from those Russian forces away from encircling Avdiivka and having to look back behind them and fight in that way. Now, this may work if he's able to amass enough forces in time, and the Russians haven't already caught on to this and aren't already looking to counter that. But if Avdiivka does fall, if in the next 48 hours or so, the Russian forces are able to enforce either a surrender or a retreat of the southern cauldron, those Ukrainian forces remaining in the southern part of the city that have been cut off now from those in the north, or if they are able to do the same in the north or in both cauldrons and effectively force a retreat or a surrender, and the Russians then take control of Avdiivka. What then happens is that a far smaller controlling force of Russians can hold the line there, and there will now be 25, 30, 35,000 Russian forces in Avdiivka without the attack on Avdiivka to fulfill them. So they will rapidly spread north and south to strengthen those pincer areas and push back upon any Ukrainian forces entering that area. The challenge and the big problem then becomes that having lost such a large fortified defensive area like Avdiivka, if the Ukrainians haven't prepared proper defences behind this area, the Russians will now look to push through here, push through to the main roads to the north and west of Avdiivka, and then move up north and south to support the battles in those areas. That's what I think we'll start to see in the coming days. Okay, I hope you have enjoyed this episode. I hope your weekend's going well, and I look forward to talking to you again soon.